It's fair to say that Anthony Byrne is one of the best brains on intelligence and national security in this parliament. He was the chair of the Joint Parliamentary Committee on Intelligence and is now the deputy chair. Much of what he knows he can't tell us, but he's never been afraid of speaking out, even if it's against his own party, if policy or cuts were going down the wrong path. Anthony Byrne joins me in the studio. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you for that introduction, Laura.
No worries. Now, Anthony, let's go to the decision of the last 24 hours first. Supplying the Peshmerga, the Kurdish forces, with weapons. They fight alongside the PKK. They're a Shia-based group. Weapons could fall into their hands, could they not? This has been a question avoided by the government today and by the opposition, but that is a reality, isn't it?
Look, I'm obviously been subject to some privy to some briefings, as some of my colleagues have, and I am briefed by the intelligence community on an ongoing basis in my capacity as Deputy Chair of the Intelligence and Security Committee. On having said that, I think it's incumbent upon the Abbott government to ensure that if it provides those weapons to the Peshmergas, that they do not fall into the hands of the PKK, because then that, in a sense, is a self-defeating exercise. The PKK is a terrorist organisation. It's listed under the criminal code here in this country. So I think that the intent in terms of what the Prime Minister has said is good. It's the application which is going to be quite critical. And I think that's the reason, from what I can, having spoken to a few people around the community today, in the intelligence community, that what they're seeking towards doing is almost hand-delivering the weapons to the Peshmergas to ensure that those elements of the PKK do not get their hands on those weapons.
But it will be difficult to put into practice, do you concede?
It will, but the overarching thing, Laura, is that there's genocide that's been conducted on a scale that we've virtually not seen in modern times, and the potential for that genocide to occur. Decisions that governments will be making, and it is the power of the government to make the decision, will not necessarily be perfect. But it's very difficult when I look upon this as someone, as I said, that's worked in the intelligence and security space. The key thing is that we have one of the most reprehensible, dangerous terrorist organisations I've ever seen in my lifetime in Parliament. I've been in Parliament for nearly 15 years. They are more dangerous than Al-Qaeda. They are subsuming Al-Qaeda. And the question is, what do we do with these people as an international community? So whilst there might be some concerns about whether or not those weapons would fall into the hands of the PKK, and that's a legitimate concern of mine, and for anyone in the intelligence community, it's the necessity of the human drama that's occurring in front of us at the present period of time that necessitates governments having to take action.
You talk about the brutality of Islamic State, and I think you echo the words of some in the intelligence community, including David Irvine, that has conveyed exactly that this is a force that is well funded, billions of dollars behind them. We know there's around 10,000 strong force. It doesn't have perhaps the structures, but the brutality, the brutal nature of ISIS is something that I think has really scared the pants off, our intelligence community. But looking at the ideology of ISIS, it's going back to basics. It's very extreme, but it's very, I guess, to the letter of the Quran. But I think what is confused is the methods used by ISIS, the beheadings, the crucifixion. This is almost out of the Maoist playbook, isn't it? And this is directed very much to the Western world, a far enemy and a near enemy as well.
Well, beheadings have been used by Al-Qaeda in the past, and there have been journalists, I think Daniel Pearl was murdered by Al-Qaeda. The difference is that we have an organisation that was deemed to be, when the Syrian conflict started and evolved, too extreme for mainstream Al-Qaeda. And that organisation now has become the new kid on the block, but is becoming the dominant kid on the block. And not only that, what is occurring is an increasing number of people from all different parts of the world are joining this group. And what that means for the countries from where they come from, what it means for intelligence agencies, and the potential for not only the devastation that's being wrought in the Middle East at the moment, but the potential devastation when they return to these countries, is something that I think has quite shocked the agencies. I think it's like the accelerating, this new kid on the block that's emerged out, and now you've got two threat streams. I was listening to Chairman Bill Rogers, I think it was about 2 or 3 days ago, And he's saying, well, not only do you now have this threat stream, which is one of the most extreme we've ever seen, but now you've got them competing with Al-Qaeda. So now we have two threat streams that governments have to deal with.
You raise the issue of foreign fighters. We know there's around 500 UK nationals, 60 Australians. Is Australia's increasing involvement, though, supplying the Peshmerga, the humanitarian drops and perhaps mission creep, does that, do you think, heighten the threat here in Australia of homegrown terrorism? We heard David Irvine say, yes, of course it would have to be reassessed, but where do you think that leaves Australia? I
think David also said that in the short term that he didn't see that as amplifying the threat. Right. And I think he was quite clear, and we've got to accept his advice on that. The difficulty is, if this entity continues, then we've got that many people that have been galvanised by the fact that they have created a self-proclaimed caliphate, IS. Then the question is, they become a magnet. So it's not only the people they have recruited, it's the people they're recruiting. And so to some extent, Western governments are going to have to face, how do we degrade ISIS? For example, I went to the United States in 2011.
But just taking one step back here, there hasn't been any, boots on the ground, any direct military involvement. But before Australia does consider signing up to anything that the United States wishes to involve themselves in, there needs to be a clear objective, doesn't there?
Absolutely.
Would that be to defeat ISIS or just contain them? What would be realistic in that sense?
Well, as the Prime Minister said, it's a witch's brew of complexity. And I'll take you back to what I was about to say. When I went to the United States in 2011, I met with elements in the CIA and think tanks around it. Their concern was that, there was almost a note that they had defeated Al-Qaeda because they had degraded the Al-Qaeda operation in Afghanistan and some of the other places of concern. They were watching Yemen, but in essence, there was a view that the threat, the totalitarian threat that Al-Qaeda could muster, had been defeated. All of a sudden, there is a new manifestation, and more extreme manifestation. And so, to some extent, I think what the Americans will be trying to deliberate on is, do they have to take the measures that they took with previous organisations like Al-Qaeda to degrade ISIS? Because that will be in the thinking of the intelligence community in the United States and some of the Western governments with whom the United States is having a conversation with.
If I can go to the thinking of the Greens, just to bring us back to what's been going on in the Parliament today, the Greens wanted to overturn a 100-year convention, essentially, that any military decision be taken by the executive. They want the decision taken by the Parliament. Is there any merit in this?
No, but I would say that these decisions are by the executive, that is the convention. John Faulkner made a very good point, however, and that is, and I think that Prime Minister Abbott almost followed up on what John Faulkner said in the Senate today, which was, it is a decision of the executive of the government to make. However, that does not preclude the Minister of the day responsible, in this case the Prime Minister, which is what occurred today, making a statement to the Parliament, and then a debate can ensue. Now, that won't determine. No, but I don't think
that would mean having to, share sensitive intelligence with every single parliamentarian in order to make an informed vote. That's just not realistic.
No, but I think that what I'm saying is that I don't think this should not be subjected to a vote. The first Gulf War, but a debate, because then voices can be heard.
Yes.
Because fundamentally, if this becomes a protracted involvement, and we really don't know what the mission statement is, there are no definition. We know that there's been discussion between the Americans and the Australians. We know that the Americans haven't determined exactly what it is that they want from Australia. We're looking at an embryonic Iraqi government that hasn't actually appropriately constituted itself yet. No. So in that sense, we need to proceed very, very cautiously. And as you say, we need to be absolutely clear, if Australia does get involved in a deeper sense than it has at the moment, that the mission statement is defined by the Prime Minister. Having said that, that is a decision for the Prime Minister and the Executive. But I do think that what should happen after the Prime Minister makes a statement, that you allow a debate without a vote to occur.
OK, just getting on to some of the proposed anti-terror laws. You chaired the committee that tabled a 200-page report on the use of data retention. How has this been able to become a bit of a lightning rod issue? I think it was pretty clear in that report how necessary that data retention is for security agencies.
Well, for the security agencies, but it's very important to note that the Bipartisan Committee, of which George Brandis was a member and David Johnson was a member and Philip Ruddock was a member, that we did not come to a conclusion about whether or not there should be a data retention. So there's been a lot of misinformation about the fact that that we recommended that there should be a data retention scheme. No, we didn't. What we said was this was a decision of the government of the day, but if it did, there would be protocols and safeguards put in place and there could be a scheme that could be put forward for consideration.
But there has been a number of briefings. This was a joint committee. That's what I'm trying to get to. And then why then has there been a bit of an issue made by Labor in terms of, I guess, what the government's trying to look at? This, I mean, the government's not trying to go further than Labor was willing to.
No, well, the Labor government didn't make a decision about whether or not to proceed with data retention. It looked upon, the difficulty was, Laura, that the former Attorney General Roxon pushed this to the committee. The committee took some period of time to appropriately deliberate it. But we tabled that report in the last parliamentary sitting week of 2013, before the election. So it was very difficult then to get a considered debate when we proceeded to a leadership change in an election.
Okay, just staying on metadata for a moment. The government is talking about in terms of using an origination IP address instead of a destination IP address. Now, we are getting semi-technical here, but essentially the government wants to look at financial records, traffic to certain websites, download volumes. That's entirely acceptable, isn't it?
I could give you a definition of data retention that the committee accepted, and it's more about because of the evolving forms of communication. What I would say in terms of metadata, you said about financial records. It's not about financial records, it's about the location of an address. It's about, for example, if there's an IP address that the agencies might want to have a look at. They basically might get information, then they try and find the person behind the address, and that initiates other series of investigations. Right. But they're not looking at financial records, they're looking at telephonic communication records.
Okay, you talk about the committee tabling its report in late 2013 before the election. Can I be frank in saying it seems curious to me that national security, the homegrown terror threat, wasn't really a big issue in the previous Labor government, and Labor scaled back some of the funding of those national resources, which you were so outspoken in talking about, efficiency dividends and the like. Is this just something that has emerged in the last 12 months, or did perhaps Labor drop the ball on this?
In reflecting on this, and by the way, the government still has the efficiency dividend. So, you know, it's an ongoing concern of mine, and I would put the same question to the government. Why is the efficiency dividend still there? If they're so concerned about resourcing to intelligence agencies, a question I would have, and our committee is currently looking at this, the efficiency dividend is still there for the intelligence agencies. And so that is still a concern for the intelligence agencies.
So $64 million that's been announced by the government, it doesn't go far enough. But should it be something that is looked at year upon year, or, you know?
I think we should be looking at how effective the efficiency dividend is now and whether or not it still needs to apply to intelligence agencies.
You must have felt like a bit of a lone voice in the Labor Party at times.
I felt like my job is to my constituency and to my country and to the intelligence community, and basically it's for me to execute the job in the national interest. And yes, I did cop some criticism for raising this issue, but as history has proven, my concerns will prove to be correct.
Just finally, on the reverse onus of proof, do you have any concerns about, you know, if innocent people might be caught up in that net? Or are you confident that the government will put in place?
Well, I've heard two different interpretations of what that might be. I would like some clarity. So before I comment on that, could someone be absolutely clear? Because I've heard the Foreign Minister say one thing, I've heard the Attorney General say another thing, I've read newspaper reports, so three different accounts. It would be good to get one complete written account, and this is what needs to happen, in my view. And just to finish off this discussion, bring all of the legislation that they're leaking to the media that they're talking about and bring it into the Parliament in draft form as recommended by the Joint Parliamentary Intelligence and Security Committee. Bring it in so we can have a proper discussion and so we can narrow down precisely what it means rather than having arguments about media headlines and media leaks.
Has there been enough bipartisanship on the issue?
There's been a lot of bipartisanship on the issue in terms of the Intelligence and Security Commission and Committee, and I'd also say I think there's a heck of a lot of bipartisanship between the leadership of our party and the leadership of the coalition.
Yeah, we saw the difficulty that George Braddis got into, for example, with explaining metadata. Do you think part of the problem here is not just George Braddis, the government, but opposition not really understanding, you know, what the depth of what's required for intelligence agencies and the issue of metadata? Do you think some parliamentarians have really had to come up to speed in recent times about what all this means?
And continue to do so, because we'll be waiting for the draft bill that will clearly define what metadata will be. Yeah, I had some sympathy for George. George was an incredibly assiduous member of our committee, and we worked incredibly well
together. He gives you credit in the Senate, I might say.
It sounds like a mutual admiration society, but, you know, to his credit and to the people on that committee, the difficulties in landing this report at the time in which we did, the analogy I would use would be this: was we were landing a Hercules on an aircraft carrier with a 100-kilometre-an-hour wind with a 14-foot swell. That's how difficult it was, but we did it because of the goodwill and bipartisanship of the committee.
All those in the military will appreciate that analogy.
Thank you. I hope they do.
Anthony Byrne, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for your time.
And after the break, we will speak to the Justice Minister, Michael Keenan.